right. Well, welcome back, friends of the podcast. We have advanced 2 whole years since the last time you saw us play GoldenEye. And today, we are talking about one of our favorite films in the last of the 20th century. We're talking about The Mummy today. Mark, how do you recall or look back upon this film?
I look back fondly, although, Joe, I do have a story that goes along with this film.
Ooh, please tell.
So, at one point in time, I was a young man, before I became this withered and, tormented soul you see before you,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Week after week. And when The Mummy first came out, I thought to myself, you know what? You're an enterprising young man.
Mm-hmm.
Why not try to get some ladies to go visit this film with you? And it was actually kind of funny how this worked out. I asked 2 girls from my class to go see this movie with me and a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly rumors began that I had a crush on either one or both of these girls that I asked to go to this movie. Believe it or not, I wasn't out for anything other than friendship. I just invited them along. I thought it would be a fun idea. And I was tormented for several weeks because of it.
I mean,
everyone's like, "Hey, are you a fan? Do you like Stephanie? Are you a big fan of Stephanie? Do you want to ask for Stephanie out?" It's like, no, Stephanie and Jenny, they were just 2 girls I asked to go see a movie with. There was nothing implied.
Oh, if there was, that is quite the flex. Like, imagine, I'm torn between these 2 ladies. I think I'll bring both of them to the movie. And what movie, you may ask? The Mummy. This makes sense. This is perfect.
Yeah, it didn't work out for either one of those 2 ladies and myself. It was just friendship. That's all I was looking for. I just wanted to go to a movie with a bunch of people, have a good time. Mm-hmm. But no, 1999 was very relentless. It was tough on a young guy like me. So yeah, that was kind of rough. I was 13 years old, but you just pack that down.
You pack it down. And then you forget it ever happened until you form a podcast several decades later to bring that back up. So that is not where I thought you would go with that direction over your thoughts about this movie or your memories of this movie. But I'm glad we went there nonetheless, because this is something that had a bit of a recent, I don't want to say full-on renaissance, because there is the Brendan-essence that's going on right now. But
the Renaissance?
Yes, the Renaissance. But even before that, I would say, think even last year when we did an episode entirely on shitposting. The Mummy was actually one of the shitposting sites that kind of inspired us to even talk about that, because this is just a movie that had so many, for better or worse, memeable moments through it, that it was just very, very memorable because of some very standout scenes. And even its sequels get some pretty memeable moments out of it. But it's definitely one for whether it is the memes or the memories has stuck in the mind of these 2 podcasters. And I think plenty of people who can look fondly back upon this, because this is unrelated to both the original Mummy that came out in the 1930s or 40s?
1932.
That's the one, 1930s. And the one that came out with Tom Cruise later. While all owned by Universal. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just using voices tonight. I'm sorry.
No, I like it. I mean, if actually at some point in time you could actually be very upset with me for not respecting the sacred of the old and the timeline of the new, because I feel like that is what gets a lot of people into trouble in The Mummy. There's someone who disrespects the history and doesn't understand what's going on, and they awaken the bad. And I feel like that's what I've just done by not remembering the proper decade of the original.
It's okay. That's why I'm here, Joe. You and I have talked about this before. My memory tends to be pretty good, and it's really useful in a spousal argument. But tonight, It's being used for the good of movies discussion. And for this movie, let's talk about some really quick facts on this one.
Okay.
Now, compared to Dread, the grosses were not too low for The Mummy, actually. It did quite well in the box office. It pulled in $416.4 million in 1999.
Ooh. And how much did it cost to make this ditty of a movie?
Oh, it cost $80 million.
That is what you call a stage 3 success, because there was plan 1, make movie, part 1, make movie, part 2, part 3 was purely profit here, and it succeeded very, very much. Because holy crap, an $80 million budget and a $416.4 million box office, that's massive. I mean, I was going to say it goes to show how it's sad, even thinking the originality of Hollywood is gone because this was a hit. But even then, this is technically a reboot too. So here we are, mad over reboots, and this one kicked some serious buttocks in the box office. I
mean, it did a damn good job, seemingly coming out of nowhere. Because when we talked about this in the Van Helsing episode, these traditional horror films kind of stayed dormant for quite some time, even though we got at times maybe some straight to DVD films or made for TV movies, that kind of thing. But this is the first time that one of the classic Universal horror genre icons came back and kind of blew the doors off of things. But here's the thing, Joe. You and I have once talked about the power of inflation, which for those of you that are thinking about it today, we're not talking about today, as it is very painful indeed. But as far as earnings go, Joe, when we adjust for inflation, as we used to very early on in this program's history, which some people thought was just really nerdy of us, but cheerio, we're going to do it again. In 2022 dollars, this film would have brought in $744,135,606.24.
Stonks, ladies and gentlemen. That's what that says right there. That's huge.
That's a Deadpool 1 right there. Seriously, that's what The Mummy did in terms of buying power, was essentially the same amount that Deadpool 1 raked in. I'd say it's pretty good.
I do too. I mean, which is I don't want to say surprising, but if you look at the ratings that this movie got though for its time, you look at IMDb rating, gives it a 7.1 out of 10. Not bad. It's a 71%. That's respectable, but not great by any means. And a 61% on Rotten Tomatoes, if you care to go with their ratings. But if you were to go for the film critics of the time of the movie, since neither of those two were really doing anything at the time, you had Roger Ebert of the Siskel and Ebert duo, gave this 3 stars. And he said it was a preposterous film, but he couldn't stop loving it.
Which to me just makes me question the integrity of the 5-star system. Because shouldn't we weight this based on how much we enjoyed it? And I have to say that I agree with what was said, but I think it deserves more than 3 stars. I just feel like it deserves better than that, because it is ridiculous. But when you kind of push it through the lens of the swashbuckling movies of old and combining some of those action adventure elements, I don't really think anything is too crazy in this movie, even in 1999 terms. I mean,
no, and I think maybe that's maybe where Ebert is coming from on this, is that really it doesn't do anything new as far as the swashbuckling genre does go. It actually plays a lot on just the things that all of those movies do and do well. And it's hey, this is kind of a swashbuckling greatest hits album that we're making into a movie for you. And because of that, it kind of purposely plays on all the things that that the filmmakers know you're going to like. And I think maybe Ebert may have thought that was almost cheapened in some way, and that it's not doing anything new for the genre. It's not advancing it in any way, shape, or form. It's just doing what we love, so we can't help but love it. sort of thing.
Really, I don't think it's any different than what an initial Indiana Jones did for that same genre, right? It's I don't think it's so much that we're getting introduced to something that we don't quite understand. I think for most people, it's just something you'd never are exposed to because you didn't live during the 50s or the 40s and 50s. You didn't know the serials that influenced these kinds of films to be made. And so I think that's really what it is. It's people seeing this for the first time and thinking it's brand new, when really it's not. This is not that new of an idea. Clearly it's a reboot, like you mentioned, from the 1930s. So I think that's what it is. I think you're just seeing something you're not used to. And back before we rebooted everything every 4 years, it still felt fresh.
Still worked. Yeah. And I guess that is part of the thing, because, they rebooted like an idea that this time was over 30 years old. They didn't wait it's been, like you said, 4 years. You could probably have at this again and see if it works. And because of that, it felt fresh to audiences who had never seen this before, because looking at this, I'm trying to even think of like the other like classic Universal monsters that maybe would have gotten something relatively around this time. You probably have Wolf with Jack Nicholson came out around this time, maybe a few years before. But even that worked, and that was supposed to be more of a serious drama. Dracula, I don't think got anything but a serious attempt around the 90s. I think he came in the 2000s more because of how successful this was. Frankenstein hadn't been touched in forever. The Creature from the Black Lagoon hadn't been touched in forever. If anything, with those guys, maybe since trying to think. Monster Squad in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and that's the thing. You did see some of this stuff pop up in the 80s, but not as like an original influence from these films. Like they were somewhat original ideas that pulled, similar subject matter, like Teen Wolf, for example, or Dracula Dead and Loving It, or any of those types of things, like Interview with a Vampire. Like you get different takes on these characters, but not trying to reboot what that character did back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Yeah. So it's I'll put it this way. When I heard The Mummy coming out, like I told you before, I read some of the books of old, the sacred texts. And so I was familiar with the stories because, I grew up on them. Yeah. But when this one came out, for some reason, it didn't really register with me that this was a reboot. So, as I aged, I did look into the background of how this came to be, and this is a property, Joe. I can't believe just how much it got molded and shifted and changed, because the version that we ended up getting, it had basically been sitting in Universal as this concept for the better part of like 6 or 7 years.
Ooh.
Yeah, wow, it kept getting bounced around. Yeah, it did. So it was originally conceived as like a B grade horror movie. Okay. And so Universal Studios did this thing where they're like, okay, tell you what, we're interested in pumping some life into this mummy concept, but we don't want to spend a lot of money.
No one likes doing that.
No. Some guy in a boardroom just said, "Hey, get that zombie guy in here. What's his name? George A. Romero.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, get that dude in here.
Get Night of the Living Dead in here. Okay.
Yeah, get purple zombies and weird shit in here. Let's talk it through." But seriously, they got George A. Romero. They wanted him to come in and do his little spirit fingers over a script and try to get something going.
Yeah,
did not work out. It just didn't happen. They were going like, yeah, you know what? I think even we know that we made a mistake.
Yeah, like the little money we want to spend on this, we know we won't make back with what was just brought to our attention here. So we're gonna have to pass and mothball this one once again.
Yeah, it was basically the equivalent of like taking a brand new roll of toilet paper and putting part of it into the toilet and then just flushing it and watching it all go to waste. It's the same idea. And honestly, I love George A. Romero. Do not get me wrong.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, we're talking mid-90s, he's coming off of his original works, I would say horror is not exactly at like an all-time high or anything.
Mm-mm.
You know, that kind of concept might have worked a little bit later.
Yeah.
Didn't happen here.
No.
So, and I think the reason why it didn't work, because at this point in time, Universal wanted the Mummy story to actually take place in like modern day and not in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted this
That's
like
a gamble.
yeah, they wanted a Terminator version of the Mummy to exist in the modern day. That's basically what it whittles down to. But covered in bandages, of course.
Oh, of course, yes. Still going after a specific person for probably a really dumb, contrived reason. Not to hit the Terminator. Like, the Terminator story made sense. That was perfect. But like, this is something where this one I don't like. It would have to be perfect to work. And I think that's, if anything, that's what the Universal monsters like have shown us, is that they need to be the right story at the right time, and the monsters need to be allowed to be monstrous. Otherwise, they don't work. Because that's what we saw. Like, it worked in the 30s. It worked here. It didn't work in 2017, where we tried doing, a modern times version of it, and it tried doing its own weird thing, and it just didn't pan out. It didn't work right. So that's why, like I say, like, making fun of the whole, like, oh, what a sort of dumb, contrived reason. Like, honestly, like, all these movies, like, I feel like if they bring a director in, like, the first thing the director is going to say, sitting down at a table, is like, hey guys, we got one shot at this. it's a long shot. It's probably not going to work, and it has to be like the perfectly kind of dumb yet believable reason. And they kind of make that's how this movie works. And I don't want to say the reason isn't entirely dumb as far as this goes. Honestly, it does something that you said, like, back when we talked about Batman the Animated Series, which, rest in peace, Kevin Conroy.
Oh yes, recently.
Always too soon for a lot of our favorites. But anyway, when we talked about how in that series they made sure that the villains always had a reason for why they were doing what they're doing, that we can see that they were people before they were the villain. Mm-hmm. We kind of get to do that with our Mummy in this movie. Whereas in, like, the 2017 one, it's like, who gives a shit about that reason? That didn't work.
See, now that's a very important factor in this, because Universal, I think, did actually learn through all these revisions. Okay. They did actually deny some ideas, and they didn't pull the trigger on every single thing that came their way. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the ideas that came out of this, like, 5-6 year idea mining process, at one point, it was proposed to have Daniel Day-Lewis be the Mummy.
I mean, why not have Abraham Lincoln Mummy? I think that'd be great. Yeah, because this is is this before Gangs of New York too?
This is before Gangs of New York. Yeah.
Okay, so all right.
So yeah.
I mean, could you imagine? Because isn't he famously like a method actor where he stays in character? Yeah. So could you imagine him just like he just doesn't stop being mummy the whole time?
I mean, imagine the producers. They're like a PA walks up to the director and goes, "Hey, so Mr. Lewis would like to remove his organs and put them in canopic jars, and he would like to separate the areas of his soul. Are we willing to do that?"
What, Mr. Lewis? We're getting something big from the producers here, and I gotta say, big fan. I support this 100%. But the guys up top, they're just saying no.
and that's when he says, "I'm the high priestess of the Pharaoh, clothed in immense bandages." Yeah, that would be great. Oh my god. You know what? I surprisingly, I'm not upset about that idea. That could have been good.
Sign me up. Yeah. I'll watch that.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why is because, really, when you look at it, 90% of horror movies are shit. Let's be honest. They're not great. Yeah. It's a rough genre. If you doubt me on that, okay, look at the best horror movies out there. You've got, like, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. How many movies are in those three, like, series by themselves? And how many in each series are actually good?
Yeah.
One, maybe two. That's pushing it, to be honest. And then after that, even look at like Alien. Alien's great. Aliens is great, but Aliens isn't even a horror movie. It's an action movie. Alien 3 tries to go horror. Sucked. Every Alien movie since Aliens, honestly, not great. So
yeah, even Predator.
They're so hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even Predator screwed up quite a bit. I mean,
Predator
1.
Yeah,
Predator is good.
Mm-hmm.
Prey is a solid film, which we're not talking about that today. But your point is well received. I think that I think horror worked for some movies because of the campiness and not because of the actual, all out scare your, piss your pants scared type of thing. And the movies that did tend to do that, I don't think attract the same people.
No.
So that's why I think the balance is important here. Like, you're trying to make something that is rooted in what was scary for the time, right? But could be viewed as campy now. And that's not easy to balance at all.
No, not at all. And especially when, again, your source material came out in the 1930s. It's very hard to make something from that era scary.
A little bit changed. Yeah.
A little bit.
Little tiny bit. But hey, through this process, though, we ended up getting the flesh-eating scarabs that show up in the movie. We ended up getting this like romance story, that kind of got folded into it. And then the idea of past lives and kind of encroaching on the present, which didn't really happen in 1, but does come through in part 2.
Yes.
So, and Universal, Joe, they were on the ropes. They were desperate. Okay. They had
tell me, I want to know how they got desperate, because like they had Jurassic Park 6 years before this movie, and that was brilliant. How did you fuck up so bad after Jurassic Park?
Because they failed, because a talking pig could not garner the box office that they needed. Yeah, Pigs in the City just didn't work.
No, and again, another gamble, talking animals. That's up in the air, guys. That's tough. Especially if another studio already had a talking pig, you're probably not going to get another talking pig to work.
They tried. It did not work out.
No.
They were seriously desperate for something to work out. And hey, guess what? That's when our friend Stephen Sommers shows up with a suitcase full of horror-based ideas.
Ooh.
And they start listening to this dude because he started talking about some of the things that they had wanted to start doing that they hadn't really shared with people. So just think about like how, like the police don't release everything about a murder that just happened because they want to catch the killer.
Yes.
Well, Stephen Sommers did this except without murdering anybody and just having good ideas. And Universal's like, this guy is thinking what we're thinking without us telling him.
Same page. Yeah.
Yeah. Could be viewed as a yes man to some people, but others are thinking, I want to spend tens of millions of dollars with this guy. So I mean, I think that was a good idea, but here's the part, Joe, that you kind of alluded to before. When it came to this movie, clearly ideas were being milled for quite a while. And I think Stephen Sommers understood what the undertaking was to make sure they got it right. And I'm still kind of surprised that he spent like a ton of time with a UCLA professor just to nail the language of the Egyptians.
I mean, this is also, again, like the cool Hollywood shit that goes on like every once in a while still. Just, again, like when people actually take time to care about a movie to make sure that it's done right, really, really helps. And again, like something like this, like again, taking a 60-plus-year-old idea, trying to reboot it, and actually, caring about like the source material to some degree. Which again, like for some reason, like when you look at like again, like superheroes coming up, and how like people can stray from like the source material so quickly, and those stories aren't nearly as old as the ones that were done here. And it's like, wow, really? Superman's a dick now? That's weird. But sure, we'll go that route.
And it's illustrated. They did all the work for you. There's nothing to interpret.
It's like it's literally storyboarded for you right there. You can't screw it up, and yet you did. Good job. But anyway, so again, like the idea that he did this. And I think the screenplay itself for this movie took a year.
It was not hastily put together, that's for sure. Yeah, it took at least a year for him to get ideas to the page, and then making sure that it fit what Universal was looking for. So yeah, I mean, to me, that already tells me that somebody gave a shit about this movie.
Oh my god, it's the opposite of like my favorite. God, I think it may have been some sort of candy bar commercial or something that was making fun of it. It came out around the same time. It was right after like Godzilla '98 came out.
Oh god!
And which we should probably do that movie at some point in time and all of its horrendousness. But it was basically they had like an idea for a giant monster movie, and then they spent so much time and all these ideas of what they could do to promote the movie. And they're talking about toy sales, weird slime stuff. They've got this epic poster. They've got tie-ins with restaurant deals and all this stuff. And then right before the commercial at the end, they're like, "So we've got a script for this thing, right?" And someone at the table says, "No, not yet. We could probably bang one out by Friday."
Yeah,
that's what so many of movies feel like sometimes. It's like, yeah, you guys, like, if you put time into this, we couldn't tell. And that's at least different about this movie is that while you can look back on it now, and some of it does not hold up, we'll get to that later. But the part that really does hold up is how fun the movie is. Like, you do get swept up in the story because it has plenty of tropes in it, but they're the tropes that are familiar, predictable, but not predictable to the point where you kind of want to gag on them. They're predictable but fun. And that's, I think, because of the care put into it, they didn't get the tropes to the gagging like portion of it. It was like, no, like, we're going to do this, but we're going to ease off a little bit and not go too hard into it so you get sick of the movie while you're watching it.
And you know what? Here's where I think they made some good decisions, because when you talk about hastily throwing things together, well, initially they were thinking of having like Tom Cruise, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Brad Pitt.
I'm assuming Damon and Affleck were a package deal at this point too. Like, you get Damon, Affleck's just going to be there. Damon's Mummy, Affleck's O'Connell.
Or they just both play O'Connell and they switch between scenes, and when they never tell you when.
I would be fine with that. I'd watch that goddamn movie. I don't care. We get 90s Affleck Damon tag team back. I'm in. Sold.
Yeah, that would be horrendous.
But I mean, if there's even a scene where like they end the Mummy and they do the last little thing, and then it's Affleck at first, it says Apple, and it's a quick like jump cut, and it's now it's Damon saying sauce.
Yeah.
Nope. I'm so, like, who's not going to love that? Everyone's going to love that, except for the people who haven't seen Good Will Hunting. They'll be very lost on it, and
they'd have to rename it to the Mummy, you know, like Boston style. Boston, the Mummy, okay, Hey, Imhotep, how's your mother doing? Huh? Okay,
we have them be terribly American, and then instead we make the three Americans really British, and they just they give them shit the whole time. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I thought that when I read through that, I was like thinking, I think if you replace Brendan Fraser with any of those guys at this time, I don't think they could pull off the balance of this. Being slightly comedic at times, but still being serious and not making it too dark. You know, like like Brendan Fraser did a really good job with the concept of, you know, O'Connell and Rick O'Connell. And I mean, it's hard to quantify, I think. Like, he just, I don't know. He embraced swashbuckler.
He did. And I think, again, like, because clearly, like, we know how this worked with Tom Cruise. And I think if we would have had him in this movie, it would not have been, obviously the story would have been different than what we got in 2017, but the feel would have been the same. Because as we've said before, when you get Tom Cruise for a movie, it's a Tom Cruise movie. And if you're in the mood for a Tom Cruise movie, it's fucking phenomenal. The guy, again, like, I'm not ever going to give him shit because, again, like, he literally strapped himself to a fucking airplane that took off into the sky, and they filmed it and they used it in the movie. Like, the ball's on the guy. Like, he really does everything he can to make the movie enjoyable. But again, like, when Tom Cruise is there, like, it's going to be a very similar movie to other Tom Cruise movies because that's kind of why they picked him in the first place. So if you're in the mood for a Tom Cruise movie, they're going to be fun. But you're not always in the mood for a Tom Cruise movie. It's got to be something different every once in a while.
Yeah. Which is it's important that I think Fraser's in that role because he doesn't steal the entire movie, and it's not all about him. That's what I think is the important part here is that you have him as like the main character, quote unquote, but then you have the guy that everyone mistakes for Billy Zane, who's actually named Arnold Vosloo, and when he's brought into cast for this movie, he tells them, "My vision for Imhotep is to deliver this role straight-laced, serious, and nothing else. Like I need to counterbalance anything the other people are trying to do that's either comedic or human, right?"
Yeah.
So that was the contrast I thought that was like brutally important for this movie is that he's a villain, he's out of his own time, but he's really like terrifying to look at, you know?
Yes. And again, that's what's so important again, is that we get a villain who's not a villain for the sake of being a villain. We alluded to before, he does have this background story, which is in this case, it's a romance, which is also kind of like, a fun switch is instead of focusing on the romance of the hero of the film, that is actually mirrored with the villain, kind of showing that they do have something in common with each other. And then you have him doing anything he can to get that back. So we have a villain that is relatable, but also at no point ever, and this is also what makes it a really good fucking movie, justified. At no point do you feel like Imhotep is doing the right thing because his girlfriend was taken away from him. It is no, that's why he's doing this. Still an asshole, and he needs to be stopped.
So this is not, I don't consider this spoiler territory. It's been 23 years. Go watch the movie. But Vosloo's character obviously plays, Lord Imhotep, the priest of the pharaoh, and he falls in love with the pharaoh's daughter, which is just not, it's not good. You can't do that. Yeah, it's just he's outplaying his coverage or whatever that's called. I think that's what it is. Anyway, for that reason, people kind of die, things kind of happen, and so he's cursed to be in the underworld until someone releases him. And this is one of those things, Joe, that I love to talk about because it's one of those things that no one should ever really debate. But for fuck's sake, I gotta debate this one. The Hamdai, which is the curse that they put on Lord Imhotep for his transgressions, it makes absolutely no sense to me. Like,
okay,
like you're going to curse this guy for helping kill the pharaoh. Okay, whatever. But why do you give him like every cheat code possible in the manual if he gets released? Yep. Like, what's the point of that?
Yeah, and also it's the whole idea that it was so dark and terrible that they never wanted to put it on anyone. Well, I don't think that's the reason why you don't put anyone. Again, you're giving him superpowers. Like, Imhotep was never that strong or that powerful in his life.
No.
Why would you I guess maybe is that never explained? Like, is what he's experiencing in the afterlife so heinous and horrible that this is the balance to that should he ever be brought back, he gets all of this? Is he tortured that much? Is his spirit being picked apart and then put back together and picked apart again in a different manner? Like, what's going on that justifies him having this much power when he comes back? I'm lost on it too.
So there is part of this that makes some sense to me. If you look back on your ancient Egyptian research or look at the culture, whatever.
Yes, I have that book on my shelf.
Okay, and with the whatever on the end, I hope they kept that full title. Well, there's this concept of like the soul being more than one thing, right? Like you have the Ka and the Ba, and you have like the part of you that is your personality, and then you have the part of you that's like your spiritual form, your essence, right? And
your Katra.
Well, this is what the Egyptians believed, and so when you think about the curse and what they did to Imhotep, it's like, yeah, you're punishing not only his human side, you're punishing his spiritual as well with what they did to him, because they didn't bury him in the traditional way. And even when they discover his body later on, they're like, You done fucked up, Imhotep.
Yeah, you did. Ain't never seen no mummy like this.
Yeah, they still supposed to be, what was they say, gooey or moist or
juicy,
whatever it was?
I think.
Juicy? Yeah.
It's juicy, yeah. It's like, ooh.
It's like, yeah, that's just not appetizing at all.
No.
Yeah. So the idea of what they did to him, sounds pretty shitty if you're basing it just off of Egyptian lore. But if you're basing it off of just the realm of the movie itself, which once again, I do feel like they paid attention to this. Like they just had to have.
And speaking of paying attention to things is as we transition to other characters in the movie, because not only do we get Fraser and Vosloo in this who do great jobs, but really our co-main protagonist is played by Rachel Weisz, who plays Evelyn or Evie, who is named after the Lord who opened the tomb of Tutankhamun. Yeah. So that's a pretty fun thing that they added in. And even looking at the character of Evie is a fun character. She is very much a scholar who is always trying to keep up with the Bembridge boys. Which, if you're unaware, Bembridge Scholars was not like a throwaway thing. That was an actual college that was in the Isle of, I think, was the Isle of Wales?
I mean, you're probably right. I don't actually know where that one's located. Yeah, believe it or not.
It was a college that lasted until... No, because it went through World War II. It ended up being used as a fort for a while, and the boys got moved out because it was an all-boys college, which also kind of a fun theme that she's competing against them. And then when we get to like the Egyptian scholar in the movie with his shitty line that he throws at Evie. But anyway, it was an actual school, and I think it only made it like 75 years, and then I think it got sold off, and then it was done. But it was a school that was known for being ahead of its time, in that it was studying things that were not actually in like the modern United Kingdom curriculum. So things like American history and modern languages, which is weird that also that, this language would be something that the Bembridge boys were so concerned with. But anyway, Evie is able to read hieroglyphics. She can speak and read ancient Egyptian. She is very, very much brilliant and qualified, but also clumsy and lacking a bit in self-confidence. So she does have her flaws, kind of like, I don't know, I feel like that's in itself kind of a trope of a lot of female characters in movies at this time. While they have some really good notable things, they always have something that makes them need the male protagonist in the movie. So we get this from Evie in that she is very well educated, she's very capable, but she needs her big strong man every once in a while. And that she would ever, they never like allude to that heavily, but obviously like she willingly goes with the villain at some point in time, and it's up to Rick to save her. But everything before that, Evie handles herself really well in this movie, where she actually saves Rick at one point in time from impending doom. She is more than willing to fight for herself. So she actually see her quickly like learn and overcome a lot of those shortcomings that she has right there. And she has a brother in this movie who does not share her same sense of love of Egyptian culture and history as she really does that comes through in this movie. He kind of has it, but he uses it much more for a dodge or a hustle to try to get Crick. And this is John Hannah, who is brought in for a comedic relief sort of role, which he did not think he was the right person for.
No, he was quoted as saying something like, "I don't know why they want me here." when he got the role. And it's like, you don't think you have any comedy chops? It's like, did you see yourself on camera at all for like the last 10 minutes, man? It's like, good Lord, he was fantastic in this role. And and to your point about that balance between Evie being like truly the scholar and her brother just being kind of like Han Solo for the better part of the movie, but a lot dumber. What I thought was cool about them, though, and this is also playing into the Tutankhamun side of like real life history. Like there was like this unofficial curse that happened for the people who opened the tomb because they died in mysterious circumstances, heart attacks, all that kind of weird stuff. And so it makes sense to me that like if their parents were based off of the Carnarvon family, like the Lord Carnarvon who helped open this thing, if they were based off of that, like I wonder if they're playing into it. Did that family also die because of like a curse, right? So it was they were tickling the ivory from a sense of referencing other things. I thought they did a good job there.
I do too. And again, when looking at their characters, that having that backstory is brilliant. And like to your comment on like John Hannah not realizing he's got comedic chops, like the scene alone where eventually there is a bunch of mentally enslaved people under Imhotep's power, and there's going around in the typical like zombie fashion, Imhotep, and John's character is running to go get the car, and he bumps into a lot of them, and he sees what they're doing. They're kind of riding and getting ready to go, so he just stops, gets really stiff, and turns and starts going, Imhotep, and they just join him. It's like, come on, that was perfect. I mean, he seemed like he was having fun. That whole movie, and I appreciate him for what he did. Because I didn't know much about him up to that point. I was not familiar with him. Everybody else in the cast I kind of had some exposure to. Well, Arnold Vosloo, because I think I only saw him like one movie. But yeah, I thought that was really well done. And here's what I think is interesting so far. We haven't actually talked about the pacing of this movie. Or even one of the biggest plot pieces of this movie, which involve the lost city of Hamunaptra. And that's what this is kind of centered around, is this idea that Hamunaptra is where, all these people in this movie are trying to find, locate, pillage, find all these lost treasures that the desert took back. And there's a lot of exposition dedicated to it in the beginning of the movie. Like as we hear about, Lord Imhotep and what he did and all that good stuff, I feel like in other movies, they waste that kind of exposition, where I feel like in The Mummy, everything they talk about that sets up Hamunaptra, Imhotep, and all that stuff, it's not really wasted at all. No? Like it does get you to the point. And that leads you, directly into like the folks that are protecting Hamunaptra. This is where we find the gigolo from Deuce Bigalow, male gigolo, a dead fair. My gosh.
Which he is actually one of the references that goes back to the 1932 film. So he plays the role of Ardith Bey, which is what the alter ego of the original Mummy was. So it's an anagram of death by Ra, the sun god Ra. And so that's what Ardith Bey stands for. And that's what Imhotep went by in the original film. So I thought that was interesting. I kind of tilted my head a little bit because I go, I know that name. Why did you say that name?
Oh, God. Oh, my God. But I thought that way better than Batman versus Superman's Martha line. But I'm going to take a small break right here, because it would be completely like against my character to not bring up how much Nathan Drake owes to Rick O'Connell in The Mummy. When you look at this, look at what Drake wears in Uncharted 3, like 95% of it is what O'Connell's wearing. Like
all the way down to the scarf,
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
So everything's there. You've got the idea of, again, Hamunaptra is this city that gets swallowed by the sand because of a curse, so you can't find it, just like the Atlantis of the Sands. And even our Ardith Bey, he is a voice in Uncharted 3 as he is the head of a sect of people whose job was to keep the Atlantis of the Sands away from the mainstream people, so no one would go in and discover the horrors that await them. So it's like when I was playing Uncharted 3, I'm like, you know what? This is The Mummy without a mummy. I'm okay with that.
When you seriously go back to this, though, this is no different than what The Secret of Monkey Island and Pirates of the Caribbean ended up doing to each other. Like, you have two things with similar subject matter one thing references the other, then the other one references the other, and then you've got cross-reference and homogenation, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now we don't even know who started what. But
anymore. Yeah.
In this case, though, we totally know that somebody watched The Mummy and then made Uncharted.
Yeah, because I mean, even like, so one of the things that Uncharted 3 that was like the most thing that really, really bugged me, which is a pun, you'll see, is that the spiders make no fucking sense in that game. They don't. Yeah. There's nothing that makes sense about them. They're just kind of like, oh, here's in this like underground thing in the beginning, we see one of the spiders in like a glass jar. And then every time the spiders need to be there, these giant flesh-eating spiders, they're just there. And how do you repel the giant flesh-eating spiders, one might say? Well, there are two ways they do it in the video game. One is with a torch. The other is with a shotgun. And when you see the scarabs in this, which are going around flesh-eating, there are two ways they get the scarabs to leave them alone. One is with a torch, and the other, you guessed it, is with a shotgun. So, like, I just think, yeah, Uncharted 3 is The Mummy. And and we're all fine with it, as we should be, because it's a great game.
I mean, I don't really have any major gripes with that, because I mean, it's still an original story. Just because it was influenced a lot by this doesn't mean it's a bad thing. What I do think is kind of a bad thing here, though, is that the idea of the Magi, right? Like the original ancestors of the bodyguards of the Pharaoh, them protecting the lost city, quote unquote, really starts to fall apart when you start to think about the other things that are going on in the film. Okay. The question I have is that the leader of like the museum and like the hub of all this Egyptian culture in the area where Evie's working out of, the Magi managed to infiltrate that leadership structure, and what I'm assuming is at least some other part of the local government, right? How can you manage to get influence into these upper pillars of society and still not manage to get anything done to tell people to stop fucking around trying to find this place?
Yes. That's what I don't understand too, is because also apparently the best place information about this place is the museum that Evie works at. So why the fuck are you giving someone as smart as Evie literal access to all of the things to find this forbidden hidden city? Why not say, you know what's the best thing to do with evidence to the city that we don't want anyone to find? We fucking destroy it so no one can find it. Or we don't put it in a place where people who can read them can find them. We stick them somewhere else where no one's ever going to see them. And that would be the smart thing to do. But apparently no one in this government, in this secret organization that's existed for thousands of years, was thinking about that.
No. But I mean, to their credit, though, it was one piece of like one artifact that just happened to get traded throughout the years that winds up in a poker game that Jonathan then steals off of Rick, right? Rick probably found it while they were there or whatever. That's probably the main reason. It's like, they tried to keep as much as they possibly could from Evie and watched over her. And then this one piece arrives, and you're like, ah, shit, we can't hide it from her anymore. But yeah, I mean, that's something I've always wondered about this movie. It's like, how can you manage to get that kind of influence and then kind of flaunt it, because later on when they show this part where like, it's like, the mummy's out and we're trying to show this infrastructure that we have. And they're like, all matter of fact, like, we've killed each other a lot, but really we could have just probably passed legislation and we would have been fine.
Would have been okay. Just make it illegal to go to this area and we put guards there or something. That would make sense. But alas, no.
Yeah. Well, long story short, people finally do get to the mummy. They start stealing artifacts. Shit goes bad. We meet this guy named Benny who's
Benny.
Yeah, he's got all the horses, but he's on the wrong side of the river. Yeah, played by Kevin J. O'Connor, who is a longtime collaborator here with Stephen Sommers, which I'm fine with seeing more Kevin J. O'Connor, frankly.
Not? He plays the part that he played very well.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. Yeah. And honestly, Kevin J. O'Connor, if somehow you listen to this or someone is listening to this, we'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they do finally lead people back to Hamunaptra because there's money involved.
Of course.
And this is another question, Joe, that I have about this film.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible that Egyptian books exist when books didn't exist until the Romans created them?
Well, if you go deep enough in the pyramids and you go really, really far down, you'll actually find on the walls of them hieroglyphs of the Baghdad battery and these old light bulbs and what is definitely an Apache helicopter. So clearly, the answer as to why they had books before books were around.
Yeah.
Aliens.
For those that aren't watching the video, Joe literally just put his hair up in in the most perfect Ancient Aliens way he possibly could. Honestly, Joe, the fact that you just pulled off a makeshift Giorgio Tsoukalos is very very impressive, which I can't do anymore. My hair is gone.
Yes, yeah. I mean, but my reasoning is because Book of the Dead sounds more catchy and fun than Scroll of the Dead or Tablet of the Dead,
the Parchment of the Dead,
or On the Side of the Wall of the Dead, because that's where they probably would have written this stuff anyway. So it just.
What is that over there? That is the taupe-colored wall of the dead. We must read from it. No, you must not read from the wall.
The damned text.
And that's the driving force of pretty much like halfway through the film, and the rest of the way is like, Evie reads from the book that shouldn't exist.
Should not, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And here comes the shitstorm, which... Honestly, here's something I thought was cool about the film. Industrial Light and Magic was behind the effects that you see in this movie, which is what I think may separate it from other action movies of this era, or like right around this time. We're not going to talk about the second one, just the first one.
Nope, just first one. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But they did something really cool with the effects, though. When you see like the swarms of the locusts or, any of the sandstorms and stuff like that. What was really cool about the movie is that whenever they did these like big shots of these effects happening, when they were far away, they're digitized CGI and they do their best they can with them. But when they move in on the shots, like when you're seeing the actual people, I feel bad for the actors. They're actually covered in bugs. They're covered in rats and mice, and they're getting like sand blasted at them. Like they actually went through some pretty rough shit filming this movie. Because they were out there in the Saharan desert, parts of Morocco, and like people are getting bit by snakes and like scorpions and shit. They're getting dehydrated.
Yeah, well, again, this is a time before Sir Ian McKellen was crying in front of a green screen, because you couldn't just fill it all in later. You couldn't shoot some parts separately, let our technicians handle it later, and it'll look great in the end, like we do now. It was. Here's the deal. It can fill in the gaps that we can't fully do because like it would just be too big. It's a scale we can't do without building miniatures. And this is going to be the next step because it will be eventually better than miniatures in some people's opinion. So we have to still do something interacting with the actors because like the technology isn't there yet. So as soon as you get really close, if you were to rely on the green screen and rely on the tech, it would not look as good as it did in this movie for the time, because this is one thing with the movie that certainly does not hold up to the modern day. Some things do well, like the locust swarms and anything that is involving sand, honestly looks great. The opening scene where the opening effect scene, which even that is more practical than I think special, when like the face in the sand, the face rises out of the sand and scares the crap out of Brendan Fraser. That looked awesome. That looked really good. The big face in the sand going after the airplane with by the way, my favorite character in this whole goddamn movie, Winston Havelock. Phenomenal, like old World War I British pilot who is still stationed in the area well after the war is over. All of his friends have died in the war, and he's mad that he's still alive and the adventure is gone. And the scenes that you see him drunk first, and he's walking through like a party in a very bougie, posh place. He walks through a fountain. And he goes, "Oh, some boy seems to have spilled his drink," and he just keeps going through. And then when they have to get him because they need an airplane, and he comes up, he's like, "So, what does your problem have to do with His Majesty's Royal Air Service?" "Nothing." "Is it dangerous?" He just gets really excited that it's going to be bad. And they're like, "Yeah. Well, everyone else we've run into so far has died, so why not you?"
Yeah.
Like, just everything about Winston's great. But anyway, the CGI for that scene of the giant sandstorm and Imhotep's face being in the sandstorm, that works for this time. Like, I watched this movie within the past 24 hours. That still doesn't look bad. It is. Yeah. The stuff that doesn't hold up is a lot of like the statues that we can see like transition from the ancient time to the modern. That doesn't look great. Like the Anck-su-namun's spirit floating over things does not look great. But
but there's points where it looks okay. There are parts where it doesn't. I mean, the thing is, like, we were having this discussion about one that we would have a completely different discussion about two, right? They're just, I feel like the budgets were just totally different.
Yeah.
But in one, like when you have the close-ups of Imhotep in his like juicy mummy form, they don't look great when it's like modern, like in the daylight, right?
No.
When it's in the pyramids and he's kind of shouting at people and doing his whole Terminator thing, they look pretty good there.
Yeah.
You know, for the most part.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah.
And again, like when you watch it now and you look at those, like when you look at a lot of these CGI scenes, you can see like, for someone again who watched it in '99 and sees it now and understands like obviously modern cinema and what it can pull off, like you should pretty much come away with, you know what, for '99, that's not bad at all. It really wasn't. And again, like even the things that don't hold up that do look bad, like honestly, it's better than when George Lucas re-released Star Wars.
Oh God.
When he knew the new technology that they didn't have back in the 70s. With rocks to hide R2-D2, because rock technology was not there back then. They were able to make it work in the 90s.
Rocks have come a long way in 30 years, okay?
Huge way in 30 years.
Yeah,
and
just remember that.
We're going to leave Jabba's band out of this, and the fact that we got new characters that we never asked for and never wanted. But compared to that, like, not bad. And like we said, a lot of it, when you have like, especially like in the darker scenes, it does work and it works very well. So when you go to watch this movie, if you have never seen it before, no, not all of it's going to look good. Some of it will be downright laughable if you're expecting really great CGI, but around those few scenes that are like that, just take it for a grain of salt that this is early CGI. And even compared to further stuff out in the series, like, I'm sorry, Scorpion King, that stuff is horrendous. Like, even like looking back at it now, it's like,
yeah. But we started this conversation off with Universal saying we don't want to spend a lot of money, and I feel like that can be applied to any made for straight to DVD films. But in this one, though, I would say that the CGI overall is inconsistent at overall. Like we're talking about how they're trying to perfect something that is. I wouldn't say it's in its infancy, but it is taking its first steps, I guess. Yep. So yeah, maybe
it's a toddler.
So. Yeah, right. It still falls over every now and again, but it's still trying to walk most of the time.
It still pisses itself, but hey, you know what? You understand that.
I feel you in that struggle. But yeah, I think that's where it is. I think that this movie is at a point where Industrial Light and Magic is still doing really good work. And there's just parts where it's like, they'll probably never be able to truly perfect some of the things in this that don't quite work. But yeah, I would say most of the time it doesn't make it laughable. Scorpion King.
Yeah, Scorpion.
So yeah, but here's the thing that I want to ask you about. Did you feel like at any point in this movie that the acting didn't work, or that the acting was, over the top? Like, where do you think that the overall acting performances as a whole kind of live within this one?
This is definitely one where I don't feel like any of it was over the top. There may be, when we say there are some memeable scenes, it lives in those smidgen small areas of the movie. Like the scene that I was just talking about liking so much was like the sandstorm with Imhotep in it.
Oh,
when you see Vosloo actually, because he's controlling the sand, so you see what he's doing with his body, and he really gives it 110%.
Oh, yeah,
with his motions to his body. And then it's like, okay, that was a little too much. But considering how well he does with everything else, like, you overlook that. Like, it's not horrible. So to me, like, looking back on this, like, I don't know, like, it's like, the movie is definitely a bit of a timepiece as far as like how the characters develop and the story that's being told. But like, there's never a point where, like, you know what? I know it's a small role, but we could have done better than that.
Yeah.
And definitely not with even the larger roles in the movie. You look at like the three Americans in this, other than of course Rick O'Connell's American, but like you look at the three Americans who are also like trying to get rich by, you know, raiding things in ancient Egypt. Like, those are like, they're very much tertiary characters. They and even top of that, they're playing very heavy American stereotypes.
Yeah.
You've got like the pseudo intellectual. You've got like the straight up like Texan who wants bourbon with a shot of bourbon and a chaser of bourbon and a bourbon, like, you know, follow up drink to all of that. And then you've got a guy who kind of looks like he's a, you know, East Coast gangster.
Oh, yeah, Corey Johnson. He was actually in Doctor Who.
Yeah,
if you remember,
he was our American collector.
Yeah,
in the
season,
Dalek episode. Yeah. So he, like, even those small roles, which also, by the way, commenting on them, the scene where the boat's on fire and they're like going, like, they're like straight up yee-hawing and firing away on their six shooters, and then you get Jonathan walks over, sees them, and just goes, Americans. Yeah,
Americans.
I think until you have made a British person say Americans, you haven't truly lived. And this is something I have had the luxury of doing in my life. Because when I was in South America and I was whitewater rafting, and we would hit like the hardest rapids, and I would like be elated, be like, yeah, we made it over. This is awesome. This is fantastic. British friend Mitch, who I made along on that trip, was just in the back there, like, just happy to get along. Just goes, Americans, always trying to get hurt.
I wasn't civilized.
So, I did it. I made someone say America. I made an English person say Americans to me. So that's really great. But even that, like, okay, so look at those three. They're supposed to be stereotypes.
Yeah.
And at no point, even with them, are you thinking, you know what? That's annoying. Like, obviously, like, this isn't how Americans are. You don't feel like either like uppity about the whole thing, or not, maybe not uppity, because that belittles when people get upset over poor portrayals. But
it's not as offensive. It's not intentionally offensive. You
exactly.
know? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
and I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. Even like other smaller roles in this movie, like the Egyptologist who is in that, they get, I'm spacing on the actor's name who plays the Egyptologist. But he,
oh man, I knew this at one point in time.
Yeah, it's killer. It'll come to me later, but until then, like, even him, like, he does a really good job doing a couple things. One, like, kind of hating him, because he makes that terrible line when they're looking through the ruins and Evie's like leading O'Connell and her brother, and he makes the comment, ugh, like, they're being led by a woman, don't worry about them. What would you have to worry about with her? Like, so, like, okay, so this guy's like fucking full of himself. We don't like him. So
Jonathan Hyde.
Yes, Jonathan Hyde. There we go.
From Jumanji. Yeah.
Yes, perfect. So
what does a woman know?
Yeah, what does a woman know? So it's like, okay, so this guy is full of himself. He is smart, because we do see that he's smart because, one, he knows that Evie is not supposed to read from the book, and she kind of just goes for it anyway because she's like not as smart as him, but she is much more excitable than he is. So,
I think he's afraid of how smart she is.
Yeah.
You know, as you mentioned before earlier, how there's things that kind of take away from her power as a character.
Yep.
I truly do believe that even when she gives herself up to Imhotep, that took some brass balls, okay?
Yeah.
For her to just go, I know exactly what this has to happen here, and I'm going to do it. Like, if anything, I think that just proves how in control she is.
Mm-hmm.
Like she puts herself in danger for everybody else and goes, all right, you fucks figure this out.
Yeah. So, and again, like this is like one of those things, like again, like even the terrible acting trope of like stage performing and say, there are no small roles in a play, and that's what this movie honestly feels like. All the tertiary characters feel like they're well fleshed out enough that all their stories are believable. Anything that is meant to be some sort of caricature about them is not like completely embellished. It's not so over the top that you begin to hate them. It's like, nope, this is their trope and they're just doing the trope well. That's it. Plain and simple. And again, it goes like to the Americans, to the Egyptian captors who have Rick in the one of the early parts of the movie. Again, small parts for them, but they're not ridiculous at their parts. They're not, while they have some things that are, not great characters, you're also not supposed to like them. You're not supposed to fall in love with them. They're supposed to be kind of bad, so we have to do something that makes them bad.
They also represent that era of film too, though. And I'm not saying that's a pass, but it does make sense to you. Like that's what you're presenting, is this 1920s look at what this horror monster would have appeared like in it. And I think they nailed that part. I'm guessing that's where a lot of this money went to. Obviously CGI is a big part of it, but then the set pieces, putting all this stuff together. And when you have like good, reliable acting on top of it, I'm not saying it's Academy Award winning by any means, just like our friend did here in the beginning, our long deceased critic, Roger Ebert. But yeah, it's delivered well. It works the way it needs to. And frankly, I think that's all you can really ask for in an action movie. Now, we do need to be careful if we ever do make another one, because we almost killed Brendan Fraser in this.
We did.
And for those of you that aren't aware of that, when he's in the gallows, he's actually dying, and they kept the shot, and hopefully they don't ever do that to him again.
No, good Lord. Like when you find out that that's one, like even doing that to a stunt person, like that seems a bit much. That there wasn't something that at least like, I feel like you could have pulled that off with camera angles to make it safer.
It's like Universal didn't learn their lesson when they almost killed Michael J. Fox. Now they're trying to kill Brendan Fraser. It's like, stop hanging people. Like, don't do it. Like, what are we thinking? Oh, good Lord. It was the 20th century, people. Like, come on. So, yeah. And, oh my gosh, even that scene, like the whole, like, oh, look, he didn't break his neck. Like, was that also the reaction of the director? Like, oh, you know what? They didn't break his neck. Let's keep it. Imagine that. Imagine Stephen Sommers is like going, wait, was that a line we wrote? Or no, his neck didn't almost just break. All right, guys, let's write this one. Yep. Just keep it. Just keep it.
Yep. Keep it. Keep it going. Yep. We're perfect.
Ultimately with this film, it's one of those films that I won't even call a guilty pleasure, because I don't think that's the right way to describe it.
No.
It's a film that I don't think you're ever going to look at and go, I'm going to cringe at moments in this movie.
No.
Maybe you don't care for the CGI, which we kind of covered, but in a lot of movies that are kind of set in this like horror genre or even action adventure adjacent, normally there's a scene in an action movie that makes you truly cringe.
Oh God. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's like using two guns to fire at like 40 people and hitting all of them. Other times it's like grabbing a horse from the wrong side and somehow flipping yourself over on top of it. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in this movie.
No.
And so I truly think that it's not a guilty pleasure movie. It's just a really, really solid action film that just happens to revive an old, horror character.
Yeah. And like a lot of like Warner Brothers is doing this a lot, where they will actually put a disclaimer in front of an older movie saying, hey, while we do not condone like the language that was used in the time, we also are not going to change it because we feel like it would take away from how far we've come and it would diminish like what was done in the movie. We're just going to let you know that, hey, we no longer support like the views and the lines that are said in this movie, or how Disney, which will just completely edit the older stuff out and put different things in.
Yeah.
When you look at this movie, it doesn't have a lot of that where you have to apologize for it, or it is going to be so bad that you're going to cringe at it. Like, oh God, you can tell this thing was made in the 90s by the way because of that line or because of this scene. The only way you're going to do that, like you said, or mostly you're going to do that, from like you said, is through the CGI. It's like, oh, okay. But there's no like dead, terrible scene that's like, oh God, here we go again. This is an old movie and you can tell. You get that in small enough doses where you're not annoyed by it. Where it's like, oh yeah, it is. I get, it's annoying that Evie had to be saved. But again, like Evie also let herself get captured because it actually saved everyone else by her doing that. And she knew that was what she had to do. Or she could have resisted that, been taken against her will, and everything. So even though like part of the trope is fulfilled, like we said, it doesn't do it in the very annoying old manner where you're like you're sticking up your nose at it or you're sick of seeing it. So this is one of those cases where this movie is definitely, a timepiece, but it's a timepiece that's not embarrassing. It's not, you're looking back at your photos from the 90s. This isn't the one in the neon colored shapes all over your shirts picture. This is not the every portion of your shirt is a different color silk button-up picture. This is not your bowl cut. This is just, you look at a picture like, you know what? I look younger there. That's what this is.
Yeah, or you can look back at it and go, I was younger and then got made fun of incessantly for several weeks because I invited 2 girls to go watch this with me when I was 13. And with that, we thank you for listening to Digital Dissection. As always, we appreciate all the Dissection crew does for us week after week. Your support does go an incredibly long way. And if you happen upon this show by accident, which surprisingly, many of you do. I mean, Joe, we did the math. I think only about 15% of the people that are subscribed to this show are comprised of the overall views. That's what really doesn't make sense.
No. So that must mean a lot of you are literally walking with your phones, tripping, falling, and for some miracle are hitting play on our podcast. I assume that's what's happening. So if you've done that today, and by Jove, these boys have found out exactly how I've stumbled upon the internet radio show, then please hit subscribe.
Yes. And hey, we also like hearing from you. So feel free to message us over at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. We do read that inbox, and very few things end up in that spam filter. So hey, we welcome your ideas for future shows. And honestly, if you want to talk to us about your favorite mummy-based properties and movies, we'd love to talk about that too. So anything you'd like to discuss, send it on over. And Joe, until next time, I think that it's too self-serving to say what we normally say.
Yeah.
But I don't have anything else to say.
No.
So I think we officially ran out of money this time.
We did. The budget's gone. So we will say until next time, keep on dissecting. And if it's dangerous, you should probably do it.